Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to the Cheap Stack Show. And this week we'll be highlighting a game of the week that will not be played in Miami, and I'll get into that after this.
There is a ton of value in current underdog playoff best ball ADP. Elite offenses like the Bills are easy to stack. Take advantage of uncertainty and start drafting now. Use the promo code SEEK for up to a $100 match on your first deposit. And subscribe to Heat Seeker Sports on YouTube for underdog strategy and drafting shows.
That's right, guys. The Buffalo Bills are now have their odds improved to about 75% chance of making it to the playoffs. Same with the Los Angeles Rams. Those are two teams that I've highlighted on targeting in these playoff best ball drafts, and they have started on underdog. A lot of value still out there, and you can get in on that too. Sign up for an underdog account. Use the promo code SEEK. And on your first deposit, they're going to match you up to $100. So make sure to use the promo code SEEK with a new account and make your first deposit, and they will match you up to $100. And I'll be putting out a ton of content with, just all sorts of recommendations and teaching you guys how to play playoff best ball and stuff like that, how to draft, what teams to target, and stuff like that. So you're going to want to subscribe to the YouTube page. I'm at 250, so I only need 50 more to hit 300. That's my goal for the season. So hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. I'm looking for 15 likes to get me to a short video right before lock tomorrow. And we have an interesting slate. It's week 16, and there is a game that is going to get a lot of the ownership, a lot of the attention. And I think it's a game that doesn't really necessarily have a matchup that is going to lend itself towards a shootout. So I think it's a game that we can easily get away from. And there are other games out there that are more set up for shootout situations, and they are going to be very, relatively low owned. So we can focus on those games. And, we'll get into that in a second here. I'm Simon Edwards at PumaCom with Heat Seeker Sports, and this is the Cheap Stack Show. And what I do on this show is I take a look at the Draftkings slate and I try to pick out games where we can find some value, particularly in stacks, and ways to get off the common build and to compete against 20% of the field as opposed to 80% of the field, and to find value that people are just ignoring or they're not seeing or whatever. But there is value out there every week, and there are players out there every week that everybody is ignoring, that are flying under the radar but are screaming values, and it's easy to kind of pick those out. We've had a few big hits recently. Joe Flacco, I don't know if there was anyone else touting him the first week that he played, and I was recommending him that week along with Zach Wilson. Both those guys had huge games, and just every week we're picking out these great values that nobody else is talking about, and it's because we're looking just at the spreadsheet, not looking at any of this DFS content that other people put out where everybody just kind of gets into a hive mentality. My focus during the week is on showdowns and breaking down individual games. So when I get to the main slate, I'm able to take a look at it with fresh eyes. No bias from listening to any other DFS throughout the week. So you're getting an unbiased look just based strictly on my spreadsheet and what my spreadsheet is telling me. And it tells me a lot of things that are different from what we hear, like just in general from the DFS content community throughout the week. So let's get into it here. If we look at the first game, let's see, we got Indy at Atlanta. And one of the games that I like the most on the slate, I'll just say it at the top, is going to be the Tampa Bay Jacksonville game. That's the one that I'm most interested in, but we'll try and see if we can find anything leading up to that. It looks like one of those slates where there's going to be a lot of a chalk that I don't understand, that I don't know how they came to some of these conclusions, but there always seems to be chalk that just kind of accumulates on these slates, and it just doesn't make any sense when you're taking a look at it with a fresh set of eyes or whatever. And stuff that should make a lot of sense are being completely ignored. And those are the best kind of slates when you find those games or those players that are completely ignored by the field, and they have great matchups or they have great setups from DraftKings points scored against by the defense or whatever, and they just stick out like sore thumbs. But like they're like taboo players like Joe Flacco or whatever that nobody wants to recommend. Like I don't give a shit. Like I'll recommend guys that pop on my spreadsheet, whether or not they're a name that's embarrassing to recommend. Like I don't care about recommending Joe Flacco if he's popping on my spreadsheet. I want to give the best picks possible and set you guys up for success. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like this past Saturday, just today, I had the right ideas. I projected the Bills versus Chargers to be a close game, with the Chargers having a chance to be a spoiler for the Bills. I did not want the Bills to win because I've been touting them for my best ball picks, because I think that they are a huge value in best ball right now. But for them to lose would have sucked. But the spreadsheet was telling me that it was going to be a very close game and that it could be a potential upset by Los Angeles, and they almost pulled it off. Thankfully, they did not, and Buffalo is now in a great position to make it to the playoffs. I did not get the right players in that game, though. I went more with Steph Diggs, and I didn't really focus on Gabe Davis too much. And some of the players that I was gravitating towards did not work out, but my scripts worked because I had Pittsburgh over. I had Pittsburgh winning. I can't remember who they played. I already forgot. Pittsburgh, I had them winning today's game, and they ended up winning that handily. And I recommended Mason Rudolph on my two game show. I recommended him lightly, but I recommended him on my showdown show more heavily. But Mason Rudolph ended up having a big game today, and the spreadsheet told me that. So that's what I'm telling you guys. I just kind of translate it and give you guys the information on some guys that people don't want to recommend, but I don't care. I'll recommend it if it's popping on my spreadsheet. So moving to this slate, we got Indy versus Atlanta. I need Indy to lose this game because Indy losing this game helps out with the odds of Buffalo making it to the playoffs. Indy's going to be a thorn in the side of Buffalo. They have an easy schedule pretty much to finish out the season, and they are right there. There's a whole clump of teams that are, right there with the same record in the AFC, and they're all competing for these playoff spots. So Indy has a important game here against Atlanta, and Atlanta at the same time is, like a team that was embarrassed by the Carolina Panthers, and Arthur Smith is being exposed. And he was able to kind of cover his tracks with not playing these stud players on his team. He was able to cover his tracks because they were winning. Like they were barely winning, but they were winning. And now, luck has caught up with him, and they are losing. And he's sitting there baffled by why they're losing, despite not playing their best players. So Atlanta, there's no more frustrating team to play in fantasy than Atlanta, knowing that no matter what the matchup looks like, that the coach isn't going to be using the teams properly or using the players properly. So it's always tough to recommend any type of Atlanta plays. So if we look at that game on the surface, it is a decent total, 44.5 points with a 1.5 point spread. I mean, that is conducive to the type of potential shootouts or potential like close games that are going to lead to both sides of the both teams in the game trying to put up more and more points as the game goes on. It's going to be competitive throughout, but I'm looking at Indy's side. I don't really see too much interesting. I see the running backs are only getting 20 DraftKings points a game from Atlanta's defense. The wideouts are only getting 7.5 points a game from the Atlanta defense. And if we look to Michael Pittman, he's been ruled out this week, but that's going to give us opportunity to kind of look for some value. Pittman's been a stud lately for Gardner Minshew, but he got hit in a brutal kind of hit last week, and he is out this week. So, that makes Josh Downs a little bit more interesting at 5,500. He's a little bit pricey. If we scroll down, let's try to find Alec Pierce will be interesting this week at 4K, but he's had opportunities before. He hasn't really done anything, but he did score 22 DraftKings points against Tennessee a couple weeks ago. He had 6 targets in that game. Last week, he got 5 targets. So I think he was probably the guy that stepped up when Michael Pittman went down. And he only scored 2.3 DraftKings points with those opportunities. So he's not by any means like a great guy to lock in, but he might have opportunity at a $4,000 price tag. So you just try to do a little bit of digging into Alec Pierce this week. Let's see what the beat writers are saying and if they are recommending or if they're getting any insight into how much playing time that Alec Pierce is going to get and how much of that target share he's going to get. This would be a perfect opportunity for Ashton Dulin, but Ashton Dulin has been on IR all season, so we've been missing him all season. But there's really no one else very interesting. Josh Downs, the only other guy. As far as running backs, Zach Moss is out, so that sets up Jonathan Taylor, but he doesn't have a great matchup because Atlanta is only giving up that 20.1 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. But, like if Pittman's out and, some of these wideouts are not very reliable, they are going to probably lean more on Jonathan Taylor this week. Like anything can go down in these games. But on the Atlanta side, they don't have a good quarterback matchup and they don't have a good slot receiver matchup, but they do have a good running back matchup. On the surface, it's a good matchup for Bijan Robinson, but like I was saying, we don't know how he's going to get used, and it's a good matchup for Kyle Pitts, but same situation. We don't know how he's going to get used, so it's tough to plug guys like that in, but they are popping as green on my spreadsheet. So I will communicate that with you guys, and you guys can do what you want with it. I don't like to go heavy on Atlanta, though. They've disappointed too many times, and I believe they benched Desmond Ridder. So it's probably going to be Heineke starting this week. Now it's Wednesday that the Falcons plan to have Heineke serve as their starting quarterback for the remainder of the 2023 season. So Heineke gets another opportunity as a starter. Minnesota was his best game. He had 15.72 DraftKings points in that game. Tennessee. So let's see, 8, 9, and 10 were his weeks. Let's see what Pitts did in those weeks. In weeks 8, 9, and 10, Pitts had 5 targets in each of those weeks. Didn't crack 10 DraftKings points, though. I think that's more a reflection of Arthur Smith than his talent. And Bijan Robinson, 8, 9, and 10, 12 points, 7 points, 17 points. So week 10 was a good week for him against Arizona. Just double check that. Yeah, week 10 versus Arizona, but he didn't have a whole lot of throwing in that game. And they ended up losing that game 23-25. Close game. You can make a case for Bijan Robinson. He's got the matchup. He's going to, potentially have the opportunity. We just don't know what they're going to do with him. So I just prefer to move on from this one. Maybe Jonathan Taylor would be interesting just because Zach Moss is out. And beyond that, Alec Pierce is worth taking a look at, but Atlanta's only giving up 7.3 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. So he is really not that interesting this week. And other than that, I don't see anyone I'm really interested in this game. Green Bay at Carolina. This is a game for the running backs. Carolina is giving up, let's see, it's a low total game. It's only 36.5 point total. But Carolina is giving up 24 DraftKings points a game to the running backs. And on the other side, Green Bay is giving up 23 DraftKings points a game to the slot. So that's good for Adam Thielen. Let's see what Adam Thielen's been doing lately. He has not done anything, and haven't recommended him. I haven't recommended him in a long time, and he has not done anything in a long time from the looks of it. So not a whole lot of interest there in Adam Thielen. Despite the matchup. And Aaron Jones coming back from injury. Last week, he had 10 DraftKings points. He got 13 attempts last week and 4 targets. So he had a decent amount of usage in that game. And now he runs into a game where he has a great matchup. Let's see what A.J. Dillon did last week. A.J. Dillon is questionable this week. He's got a thumb injury. Last week, he had 15 attempts, so it was like a 50-50 split. But if A.J. Dillon is banged up this week, but he seems to be making some good progress, so maybe not the best guy, but he is a hindrance more than anything to Aaron Jones. But Aaron Jones at 6,400 is a guy that you can keep in your player pool based on this matchup. And they are playing in Carolina, so they don't have the weather elements working in their favor. Playing at like a cold Green Bay. Jordan Love, the passing defense of Carolina has been pretty good, so I tend to stay away from that and focus more on the run game. But there are no real good matchups on the Green Bay side for receivers, and it's a low total game. And I think Jaden Reed is going to be he's questionable with a toe injury. You don't like to see that with wide receivers, but he's questionable with the toe injury, which would make Dubs more interesting, but Dubs doesn't have a great matchup. Watson looks like he's doubtful. Wicks looks like he's questionable. They're banged up. So, yeah, I could totally see them leaning more heavily on Aaron Jones this week. Just reading to see what Wicks' situation is. Wicks picked up an ankle injury. But, he's been limited throughout the week. So at least Wicks isn't too banged up. He had 7 targets last week, 6 targets a week before that, 4 targets a week before that. So he's been getting heavy targets, but it's not a good matchup. But given the opportunity with Christian Watson potentially being out, he's doubtful right now. Jaden Reed is banged up. You can see Dubs or Wicks get a bigger workload, but like I said, like Aaron Jones is really the only one interested in this matchup to me. Let's move on to Cleveland at Houston. With Cleveland at Houston, we got a 40.5 point total, 2.5 point spread. So expecting a close game. CJ Stroud, I think, is out again, which sucks. But they were able to pull off the win last week. They beat who they beat last week. Case Keenum stepped in, and they ended up beating the Titans last week, 19-16. Very tight game, low-scoring game against a vulnerable defense, but it's a divisional game last week. Now they face off against Cleveland. They are playing at home, which is a benefit. I think this might be a sort of a revenge game for Case Keenum against Cleveland. Case Keenum's played for a lot of teams, so he has a lot of revenge games. But let's see the wide receiver situation. We have lost our guy Tank Dell to the IR. We got Noah Brown, and we got Nico Collins still. Noah Brown does not have an injury designation this week. That's good. Last week, he had 11 targets, 22 Draftkings points. What is Cleveland giving up to wide receivers? Cleveland is more vulnerable to the slot, and that is where Noah Brown is running 50% of his routes. So Noah Brown is interesting this week, playing at home. I would not be I think Cleveland can put up points against Houston. It's just going to be a matter of, can Houston keep up? And Joe Flacco has a good matchup with Houston, allowing 20.7 Draftkings points a game. And the guy that has the best matchup is Elijah Moore, but also David Njoku against Houston, who's been vulnerable to the tight end. They're giving up 13.8 Draftkings points. So I could feasibly see a Joe Stacco to Njoku stacks, and those have been doing well lately. If you look at Flacco, last couple weeks, he's put up 25 DraftKings points. That was the week we recommended him on against Jacksonville. And then he put up 22.86 DraftKings points versus Chicago. So Joe Flacco has really been good now that he's on a team that, gives him an offensive line, it gives him some weapons to use, is in playoff contention, is well coached. Flacco has all the benefits of a team that was built for Deshaun Watson, and he is making the most of this opportunity, coming off the couch and propelled into a starting role on a playoff caliber team. Joe Flacco runs into another good matchup against Houston. So we've seen him put up 25 against Jacksonville, which was a bad D. 22.86 against Chicago, which is an underrated D, and against another bad defense in Houston. I could see him putting up about 20 DraftKings points. He would throw, I would guess, to Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore, he only got 3 targets last week, but slots have the best matchup against Houston. Wideouts don't have a horrible matchup because Houston's given up 15 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. So if you wanted to stack him with Cooper has gotten 8 targets and 14 targets and 5 targets in the weeks that he's played with Flacco. 13.7 DraftKings points against Jacksonville, 23.9 DraftKings points last week against Chicago. So Cooper and Flacco have a good connection there. And it's an indoor stadium that they're playing at this week. Njoku, 14 targets last week, 29 DraftKings points, and 27 DraftKings points a week before that. And Njoku's ownership is in check. It's not horrible. It's high for a tight end. Looking at a projected ownership of around like 15%. That's high for a tight end, but it doesn't kill me. I don't mind using Njoku this week given the matchup. And I wouldn't hate stacking him with Flacco either. But Flacco's price is creeping up a bit. We were getting him at 4,900 a couple weeks ago, but he's up to 5,500. Case Keenum is at 4,900, but I don't like his matchup as much against Cleveland. Yeah, they're only allowing 13.7 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position, but I think the run backs in this one would be Noah Brown would probably be the best Texan to run back with. Probably the only Texan to run back with, really. Like Nico Collins. The wideouts are only getting 9.9 DraftKings points from Cleveland's D, so that would take Nico Collins out of my targets this week. So let's move on to the next game. Detroit, Minnesota. This is going to be a popular one. This is where all the ownership seems to be accumulating, and my spreadsheet does not like this game. Detroit has a bad matchup against Minnesota. Minnesota has been on fire with their defense. They're giving up 13.8 DraftKings points to quarterbacks. They're giving up 19.5 DraftKings points to running backs. They're only giving up 14.3 DraftKings points to the slot and only 10.8 DraftKings points to tight end. And the only ones that have good matchup are the 15.4 DraftKings points to wideouts. And like when I'm looking at Detroit, the only ones I'm interested in are, Amon-Ra and, maybe Laporta or whatever, and the running backs, but they all have bad matchups against Minnesota. And meanwhile, Minnesota, they have a good matchup at the quarterback position with the Lions giving up 20.6 DraftKings points a game to quarterbacks. Also, the slot at 21.6 DraftKings points a game to the slot. We do see a decent amount of Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison in the slot. Between them, there's about 55% of their routes in the slot. So it is a good matchup for those key players. But on the Detroit side, they don't really have a good matchup, and it's going to be, it's a 46.5 point total. I could see this going under that total for sure. I don't have a ton of interest in this, especially with what I'm seeing in Nick Mullins being one of the highest owned quarterbacks on the slate. That does not make a lot of sense to me. He's got the matchup, but he's got the weapons, but it does not look like a back and forth type of deal to me. And I would not be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if Minnesota pulled off an upset in this one. Detroit, where are they playing? They're playing in Minnesota. So Detroit has a lot going against it in this one. They do want the win, though, for the playoffs, but I don't think it's going to hurt them if they lose. But yeah, Detroit is not a team I'm not really interested in that game, except for maybe those pieces. Maybe like a one-off for a wide receiver or something like that. Given those matchups and the amount of routes that Jefferson and Addison both run out of that slot. We can take a look and see what those guys did with Mullins last week. Jefferson had 10 targets, ended up getting 84 yards, scoring 15.4 DraftKings points. So Justin Jefferson is definitely in play. Seems like he has a good chemistry with Mullins. And Addison had a big game last week. 32 DraftKings points, 6 targets, 6 receptions, 111 yards. So I do like, maybe using those guys as one-offs, but I don't know if I'd want to stack that game necessarily. What's Mullins' salary? 5,300. That's why he's high owned. Let's move on to the next game. Washington at the Jets. This is a good matchup for the Jets, but Zach Wilson is out. So it looks like we're going to get Simeon, I guess. We're going to get Simeon again. Yeah, he's going to be starting the game this week. God, but look at the points he's like one DraftKings point against Miami and 2.4 DraftKings points against Atlanta. Their offensive line just like is brutal. They just can't generate like anything in the passing game because of it. But quarterbacks have done really well against Washington. We're looking at 23.2 DraftKings points a game versus Washington, which is the highest in the league. It's the best matchup you can ask for a quarterback. And it's good around the board because they're giving up 20.7 DraftKings points a game to wideouts, which is the highest in the league. They're giving up 24 DraftKings points a game to slot receivers, which is the highest in the league. And they're giving up 28.9 DraftKings points a game to running backs, which is the third highest in the league. So every spot on the Jets has a good matchup. Simeon's salary is 4,700. You don't get much lower than that, but those points that he scores is just like he hasn't cracked 3 DraftKings points in 2 starts, and it's really tough to pull the trigger on him. Actually, I take that back. I don't think he started last week. I think that was I think Zach Wilson started last week. Let's look at Zach Wilson. Week 15. Yeah, he started, but he only had 11 attempts. So Simeon hasn't gotten a full game in yet. Week 13, he only had 13 attempts against Atlanta. So if you give Simeon that veteran benefit of the doubt, the ability to read the defense, I've talked about this numerous times, including my recommendation of Mason Rudolph today. But Trevor Siemian, he does not have the benefit of a competent offensive line, or really. I mean, he's got Garrett Wilson and he's got Breece Hall. So if you look at Garrett Wilson, let's see what Garrett Wilson did last week. Garrett Wilson got 4 targets last week. You can make a case for Trevor Siemian this week just based on this matchup, and he's only 4,700, so he saves you a ton of salary. You could stack him with Garrett Wilson. You can maybe stack him with Breece Hall if you don't want to stack him with Garrett Wilson, or you could just use Garrett Wilson this week if you don't want to start. You don't have to stack this game, but like Siemian does have a good matchup. And so does Garrett Wilson. So that's a nice little stack. Garrett Wilson's only 5,800. So I've been pretty good at picking out the games for Garrett Wilson too. And I do feel like, this is a potential game. I had this game against Houston a couple weeks ago. That's the one I think I recommended. Let's see, what did Zach Wilson do that week? Yeah, 23 points. Yeah, that's a game that I recommended last time, and they both went off. And there's one other time this season where I recommended those guys and they went off. But this feels like a game that the Jets could do good for Garrett Wilson. So Garrett Wilson, I like. Trevor Siemian, I don't hate, and he's cheap. So, I don't mind going there if you need to get a cheap stack there. As far as the run backs in Washington, let's see. Really, the running back position is the weak spot on the Commanders, but I think Brian Robinson is out again. Yeah, Brian Robinson is out again. Gibson didn't do a whole lot with his opportunity last week, but he is set up this week. Who was the other running back? There's another running back on Rodriguez. Rodriguez got 10 rushing attempts last week against the Rams. He's 4,500. Rodriguez is interesting this week because Rodriguez was getting the decent amount of work last week. Yeah, he got the majority of. So Rodriguez was being used as the workhorse, or not the workhorse, but the 1A, and Gibson was like the 2 or the 1B. So Rodriguez at 4,500 in this matchup against the Jets, which are giving up 25.4 DraftKings points a game to running backs. And they got Trevor Siemian at the quarterback position, who is not going to put up a whole bunch of points on Washington. So the game's going to stay competitive, and that's going to give plenty of opportunity for Rodriguez to run the ball this week. So yeah, I like Rodriguez this week at 4,500, and I like Garrett Wilson as kind of a run back there. If you want to do a Siemian let's do that. Let's give Siemian. We'll put Rodriguez in there, and we'll put Garrett Wilson in there. Like, that is a dirt cheap stack if you need it. Like, if you want to stack that Dallas-Miami game, like that gives you a good kind of starting point if you're looking for value. Like, you could probably get whoever you want in this build. So we'll keep building. Moving on to Seattle versus Tennessee. If we're looking at Seattle versus Tennessee, Seattle has a good matchup against Tennessee. Not the best matchup, but Tennessee has a really good matchup against Seattle. Where are they playing? They're playing in Tennessee. This would have been the spot for Will Levis, but he got freaking hurt last week. I recommended Will Levis last week. He looked like a stud on that first drive, and then he scored a rushing touchdown on the first drive of the game, I think it was. And then he had 10 DraftKings points. I thought like he hit a home run with it. And then he scored 5 DraftKings points the entire rest of the game. And he's not expected to start on Sunday, which gives us Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill is expected to start on Sunday's game. He's got a good matchup. He's going to be trying to prove a point, maybe. He's had a few games off to reflect on, like how much he sucked. So maybe this matchup gives him an opportunity to do something. And Seattle is playing for their playoff lives. Looks like we got Geno Smith back in as the starter. Drew Lock, props to Drew Lock. Like we recommended him on our Showdown show the other day, and Drew Lock, pulled out a great win over. I can't remember who it was against. Great win over Philly, and I kind of called that in that Philly game that like maybe the what do you call it? Maybe the Seattle Seahawks could pull an upset in that game, and they ended up getting the upset. Locke didn't have a huge fantasy performance in that game, but he got us there with Jackson Smith and Jigba, who was the guy that I was recommending the most. The very last drive of the game, throws a touchdown to Smith and Jigba. My teams all went from like no money to, like all basically double, triple my money. So that was a great game. Had a good game script there. But this week we got Geno Smith back against Tennessee, who has struggled at times this year. Tennessee's giving up 21.7 DraftKings points a game to the slot. That makes our guy Jackson Smith and Jigba interesting again. If you wanted to do that veteran, like I would go with maybe a Tannehill to Hopkins stack. Although those guys were never on the same page, so it's hard to kind of get to back this game. But I think I would prefer to do a one-off in this game. Like I would put Smith and Jigba in my line. He's too cheap at 4,500 for what he's been doing recently. He only got 4 targets last week, but then Drew Lock doesn't look like he threw very much last week, and he ended up getting that touchdown at the end of the game, like I was saying. 7 targets the week before that, 11 targets the week before that. Geno was the quarterback when he had that 11 targets. Like Geno was starting to lean on him a little bit, and then Geno got hurt, and Jackson Smith and Jigba had that weak game against San Francisco, and then had that touchdown last week, but he only had 4 targets in that game. But Jackson Smith and Jigba is definitely interesting this week, and this might be a one-off type of game. Like you could stack him with Geno Smith, but Geno Smith is like 5,800. I don't like that price. You could try Tannehill, but I think the better options. Tannehill's only 5K, so if you were uncomfortable with Simeon, I could see putting Tannehill and Hopkins in there instead of Simeon and Watkins. And Hopkins is 6,100, so he's only 300 more than Wilson, and Simeon's only 300. So you're only paying $600 more if you wanted to swap those guys out to Tannehill and Hopkins. I still like Rodriguez in there, and I like Smith and Jigba as the run back in that type of situation. But I don't think there's a ton of upside in that stack, but it's a value option. This is the game that I'm interested in, Jacksonville versus Tampa Bay. And this is the game that my spreadsheet is showing me the most green on. And, looking at these other games like Dallas versus Miami, there's a lot of red on there on both sides. If I look at Detroit, Minnesota, I see a lot of red on the Detroit side. So I don't know how much of a back and forth that's going to be. But when I look at Tampa Bay and Jacksonville, I see a 43.5 point total with a 1.5 point spread with a buttload of green on there. Like the Tampa Bay, just about every position has a green light. And then with Jacksonville, the only position without a green light is the running back position, and that's ETN. But I'd be interested in this game more as a shootout, and I think I like this game the most, and I might even look at these quarterbacks. Let's see. Both of them have gotten pricey. Baker Mayfield's been doing really well this season. It's cool. It's cool to see him, kind of make a comeback from all that trash that Odell Beckham, talked about him. Everybody, he was a goofball. Baker's a goofball, but he has kind of come around in this offense. He's kind of taking his opportunity and running with it. You see a lot of 20 DraftKings points games throughout the season. And then most recently, he had that 33 game against Green Bay. As far as his ownership goes, he's the third highest owned from what I see at about 10%. Let me check another source. trying to get an idea of what. Yeah, he's the third highest owned on two of the major ownership projectors. So, I don't hate going with Baker Mayfield. To obviously, Mike Evans is going to be the key guy to stack with. See what Evans' ownership is this week. Looks like he's kind of going ignored. He's at about 14%. That's not bad for Mike Evans, especially when the Jaguars are giving up 17 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. So I like having him in there. Rachaad White has a really good matchup too, because Jacksonville's giving up 25.6 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. And if you look at what White has done recently, 21 DraftKings points last week, two targets for 50 yards in the receiving game. Most of the damage last week was done in the run game. He did score looks like he did score a touchdown reception though. So he scored receiving touchdowns the past 2 weeks actually. So he's been getting opportunities for touchdowns in the receiving game. If we wanted to double stack Baker, I could see White, but White is pricey. He's at 7,400. But let's get Rodriguez in there. Let's see. That gives us that value at 4,500. So we got this stack in there. Let's find a defense. Panthers at Green Bay. Nope. Minnesota has a good matchup against Detroit, and Jared Goff on the road is interesting for Minnesota at 2,500. Bucks D, don't want them. Don't want the Titans D. Not interested in the Dolphins D. Really not interested in any of these Ds. So I don't hate going with the Vikings in that scenario. That gives us 5,500 per guy. So we'll keep going here. On the Jacksonville side, we need a run back. So let's look at a run back potential. Ridley, obviously. The wideouts, slot receiver is where Tampa Bay is more vulnerable, but we're still missing Kirk on IR. Let's see who's been running the most slot routes. Zay Jones has been running 31% of his routes in the slot. Calvin Ridley's only been 15. It might be a Zay Jones week if you wanted to run back Zay Jones. Zay Jones did pretty good last week. I don't think. Oh, he's questionable. Jones likely won't be able to play Sunday. So I mean, I guess that leads us to Calvin Ridley a little bit more. Jones just not getting it done this year. He's always hurt. But yeah, let's put Ridley in there as our run back. There's probably a better guy, like that Washington guy. He's 3,800. So if you need value, Washington's going to have a good setup against Tampa Bay because they're giving up 30.1 DraftKings points a game to the slot. Washington was getting those routes. Last week he had 6 targets. Didn't do anything with them, which is good. We could put Washington in there and just see where it takes us. Like we don't even need all this value. Like there's so much value on this slate. It shouldn't be hard to put in, whoever you want this week. If you wanted to stack that Miami Dallas game, it should be pretty easy to do. Like, look at all these cheap guys that I'm putting in here. Rodriguez at 4,500. You got Washington at 3,800. Vikings D at 2,500. Not saying that Vikings D is the best matchup, but it's a doable matchup. Let's see what tight end would be good this week. Oh, if you wanted to put Evans as a run back, Tampa Bay is giving up 15 DraftKings points a game to the tight end. I was looking at Evans' ownership earlier, and I saw that he was high owned. That helps to explain that. That leaves you with 6,400 per position. But yeah, this is an interesting game, like, to play around with. I like a lot of the stacking options. I think the guys that I like most in this game on the Tampa Bay side are obviously Baker Mayfield, because Jacksonville is giving up 22 DraftKings points a game to quarterbacks. I like Rachaad White, because DraftKings is giving up 25.6 games, DraftKings points a game to running backs. I like the Mike Evans matchup, 17.2 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. And Cade Otton even has a good matchup with 14.2 DraftKings points a game to the tight end. Godwin also has a decent matchup because he's been running more at the wideout position. He had a big game last week with 28 DraftKings points DraftKings points against Green Bay last week. So 155 yards in that one. Finally had a big game with Baker Mayfield. So, very interesting there. That should be a good. This should be a good game. There should be a lot of back and forth in this game, I think. So let's move on to Arizona at Chicago. I do like Justin Fields this week. Justin Fields is in a matchup where Arizona's giving up 17.7 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. They're also giving up 31.6 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. That is the highest. So the running backs in this game have the best matchup, and that would be Deontay Foreman. Returned to practice on Friday, but he's out with personal reasons earlier in the week. So it doesn't look like he's got any type of injury. He is interesting. Bears weren't willing to clear him for full activity. So I'm not sure what's going on with Foreman exactly. But it's kind of a messy backfield situation, which I don't like. Maybe that, like, the points that they give up to running back benefits more Justin Fields if you wanted to use Justin Fields this week. But Roschon Johnson, 5 attempts and 6 targets last week against Cleveland, scored 10 DraftKings points. He's been getting more usage, at least it feels like. But I would monitor that situation. If Deontay Foreman is playing this week, then that would make Deontay Foreman kind of interesting with this matchup. I also like Justin Fields. I think I'd stack him with, obviously, DJ Moore. DJ Moore, look at that stretch. Like, he does so much better with Justin Fields as his quarterback. 3 weeks in a row over 23 DraftKings points, and then he had a dud last week against Cleveland. But Arizona's been giving up 14.8 DraftKings points a game to wideouts and 18 versus slots. Both of those are middling. So I could see Justin Fields, DJ Moore stacks in play this week. But, on the Arizona side, they're vulnerable to slot receivers and tight ends. So that places Trey McBride squarely in play again this week. And look at what he's done lately. Kyler Murray has been locked in on him. 9 targets, 11 targets the last 3 weeks. Put up 2 weeks with over 23 DraftKings points, basically. And other than that, he's had some monster weeks this year. 5,700 though, his price is creeping up, but he is a good tight end candidate this week. And tight end is interesting this week because they have, like a group of these guys in that 5 to 6K range that are soaking up a whole bunch of the ownership. You got Cole Kmet with 12% of the ownership. You got Evan Ingram at 5,400. He's got 14% of the ownership. You got David Njoku at 5,300. He's got 15% of that ownership. So those guys are soaking up a lot of the ownership this week, which is interesting. If you wanted to do a pivot to kind of restructure your construction, like pivoting off that 5 to 6K range at the tight end is one way to do it. If you can find a cheaper guy, Cade Otton would be interesting at 3,300. But yeah, that's about it for Arizona, Chicago. I like the tight end. I like Trey McBride. I like potentially Fields to more stacks, and then I would keep an eye on Deontay Foreman to see what's going on there. Dallas, Miami. Like I said, like this, I don't really see any matchups popping on this one except for Tyreek. So Tyreek, we don't know what his injury status is, though. He's trending towards playing. They're trying to get him to 2,000 yards. I think Tyreek, if he's playing, you gotta use him this week. That leaves us with 3,200 in the flex, and you could run it back with Michael Gallup. Let's look at the entire availability for the slate here. If you go to 3,200 in that flex, see what kind of options we got. Gallup. We got Washington in there already. It's hard to find guys this week that are interesting in that range. Mechie might be interesting. Mechie only got 1 target last week, so he hasn't been getting any targets. Don't really see anybody else. Let's try to change something up here. If I'm looking at running back matchups, Bijan's got a really good one. Foreman has that good matchup. Tennessee has a good running back matchup. The Jets. So if let's say we put, what's Aaron Jones's price? If we wanted to get rid of White, and put in Jones, who has a really good matchup, he's 6,400. That leaves us with 4,200 in that flex. If we have 4,200, we have more choices. Like Elijah Moore was a guy that I mentioned. Alec Pierce, a guy that I mentioned. That value catches up with you quick. What is Trey McBride's price? In case we do double tight end. McBride is 5,700. We're at 42. I think, yeah, think you have to go, pretty much with one of those guys, maybe that like I talked about earlier on this show. If you want to go in this direction, Kyle Pitts is there. The tight end has a really good matchup against Indy. So if you wanted to go double tight end with Kyle Pitts, that would be an option. I don't really see like a whole lot beyond that. Like if you wanted to put Godwin in over Evans, now this is getting a little bit, not the direction that I'd want to go. I think I would find a guy in that 4,200 range. But if you want to do that, if you want to put Godwin in there, that gives you 5,600 at flex. You'd have Ty Chandler, who's got a good matchup. Detroit's been giving up points to. Well, they don't have a great matchup. They're only giving up 19.5 DraftKings points a game in the last since week 6. But Ty Chandler is going to be chalk this week. You'd have guys like Downs, who I'd like a lot better than the other guy. You got Ford, you got Dubs, you got Njoku. So you got plenty of options. You got Noah Brown. Just swapping out Godwin for what's his face, for Evans, gives you so many more options. Let's put Evans back in there. If we put Evans back in there and let's take out Jones, let's go take a closer look at these running backs. Kenneth Walker is 6,200 this week too. Breece Hall has a good matchup, but don't necessarily want to put 2 running backs from that same game in there. Chuba Hubbard has a good matchup. And Chuba Hubbard's been getting a decent amount of work. Look at those attempts, 25, 23, 22. But he has 25 DraftKings points, 11 and 12. Chuba Hubbard's interesting. And try and see if there's anyone else interesting. There's Ty Chandler, like I was talking about. Madison might even be back too, so that hurts Ty Chandler even more. Deontay Foreman. Like if Foreman is playing and he takes back that role that he had, he's got that good matchup against Arizona. I would keep an eye on the news on Foreman. Yeah, because if he gets the same usage that he had before, if they give him that role again, then he would be firmly in play. Khalil Herbert been mainly a bust this year. He had one good week against Denver, but it seemed like they were leaning more towards giving the work to Deontay Foreman before Foreman got hurt. So he's interesting for sure. If you wanted to put Ty Chandler in there, let's just go with the chalk. If you wanted to put him in there, that leaves us at 5K. So you still have plenty of options at 5K in that flex. Ferguson would be one. Like if you want to go that double tight end route, and that gives you a run back for Hill. What is Brandon Cooks? How is Cooks still this cheap? He's only at 4,900. He doesn't have a great matchup though. Actually, he doesn't have a bad matchup. The Miami defense has been getting better and better. Uh, so I tend to stay away from them, but they've looked better and better each week, and they're really coming into form. And that's why I don't like Dallas this week, because it's just a tough matchup. They're playing Miami at home. Both these defenses are good defenses, so it's really tough to like to get on board with that. But I could see plugging Cooks into this lineup, and I think that would make some sense. Gives us some, we have a decent amount of correlation in it. Chandler with the defense. If we put Cooks in there, we'd have Cooks and Hill from that the high scoring game, but we don't have too much exposure to that game, so it doesn't kill us. And then we have, like Rodriguez is the only standalone basically. For guys wondering about CD Lamb, like Minnesota or Miami's giving up 17.9 DraftKings points a game to the slot receivers. So it's a middling matchup. Brandon Cooks has the best DVOA matchup because he runs most of his routes on the right side of the field, and that is where DVOA is lighting up green, showing the best matchup out of the wideouts. So Brandon Cooks, I kind of like in that last spot there. Kind of rounds out that correlation. But I really like this Jacksonville Tampa Bay game. I think that's my favorite game on the slate. I think that's the direction I would lean. And this gives you an idea of like some builds that you can do if you want to go in that direction. But make sure to hit that like button. Look for those 15 likes to get a shorter video out closer to lock. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Only need 50 more to hit that $300, that 300 mark. Getting really close to that. I want to try to get that before the end of the season. And on top of that, make sure to open an account over on Underdog and deposit $100. If it's a new account and your first deposit, they're going to match you up to $100 if you use the promo code SEEK, SEEK, like Heat Seeker. And it is on the bottom corner of the screen. If you need a visual there, and I also have a direct link that you can click in the description, and you can use that to automatically use that promo code. So lots of ways to get that, and that playoff best ball, like I said, that's going to be super fun. There's a lot of value there. Already called 2 value plays that are now 75% chances of making it to the playoffs. And those are 2 teams that were going way later than they do traditionally as far as ADP, and able to get them for just an absolute steal for most of the couple weeks that this contest has been open. So check that out, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Have plenty of content on Christmas. Try to get a showdown show for each of those games, and then we have the showdown show for Sunday Night Football coming up tomorrow. So good luck, guys. I will see you tomorrow.